commissioner of Major League Baseball, is in town for all of this and more. Good to see you, Rob Manfred, here in studio in person.
Glad to be here, Rich. I've now seen all your studios.
You have. You've been in New York, now here in Los Angeles. I'm bi-coastal. You are world-round. You've been traveling with the World Baseball Classic, correct?
I have. We went to the early pools in Korea and Japan. Then I was able to see the U.S.-Dominican game in Miami. All the venues early just had fantastic atmospheres, particularly ones I found impressive. The ones in Korea and Japan, just unbelievable interest in this event.
So what do you hope to have achieved by the World Baseball Classic?
Well, I think the WBC is a huge part of our effort to internationalize the game. When you see how popular this event is in Seoul and in Tokyo, you realize we have something here. And I think you're starting to see that popularity grow in the United States. The Dominican-U.S. game, both in Miami and in San Diego this past weekend, great atmosphere, sellout crowds. Last night we had the Netherlands and Puerto Rico. The crowd was about 25,000, but it was one enthusiastic 25,000. We really think we have something that can be the vehicle to grow the game around the world.
And you could, the atmospheres were great. You could see it through your television set, obviously, and through the highlights. And then just the players. We've been talking about that on this show last couple of weeks. The players are into it as well. I mean, when Adam Jones grabbed that home run away, if you will, from Manny Machado, his teammate, and they're even though they're not teammates now, and they're tipping caps to each other, you could see just the playoff atmosphere right there. How do you translate this, if you can, to a wider American audience in March?
I think that we have the right ingredients, and its nationalism is a huge, and sport together are really powerful tools in terms of growing the game. You know, the Puerto Rican team, they all dyed their hair. Apparently in Puerto Rico, dyed blonde hair is the thing to have right now. I mean, it's really captured the country. We had the Team USA was talking about maybe we could just stay together as a major league team for the year, you know.
Right.
And it's that kind of camaraderie, spirit, interest in representing your country that we think can really fuel the event.
Right. Is there any idea of maybe doing what I guess hockey does with the Olympics? Stopping the season and having this in the middle of a season? Is there any idea about this?
We have ongoing conversations about format. Obviously, March has its challenges. We've talked about trying to do different things in terms of maybe at least the finals during the middle of the season. You know, baseball's tough, though. You know, if you don't play 162, you affect all the numbers, all the records, and those are the sorts of issues that, you know, our core fan base really care about. And that's a good thing. I don't say that critically.
By the way, as part of that core fan base, I agree.
So you have to be really careful with it. Having said that, we're committed to the WBC, and we're going to continue to look at format changes to make sure that we make it the best event it can possibly be.
And while we're here with Rob Manfred talking about the World Baseball Classic, right here in Los Angeles, the first baseman, Adrian Gonzalez, was very upset at the way things ended with Team Mexico. Have you spoken with Adrian about this at all?
I haven't talked to him directly. We've gone back and forth through the Dodger people and through some of my people that were in Mexico. Look, it was one of those things in Mexico where the communication could have been better. But the fact of the matter is the rules are the rules. The rules were applied appropriately. The right team won. But again, it's one of those issues when you have a compact event that you have to continually to look at whether you want tiebreakers that are decided off the field and whether we can figure out a way to do that better. And we will continue to look at that.
Rob Manfred here on the Rich Eisen Show as we're getting set for a big game between Team USA and Team Japan tonight in the World Baseball Classic. How is this playing out with the rest of the major league teams who are not having some of their star players in their grapefruit/cactus league camps? And then, of course, the case of the Yankees with Didi Gregorius for the Netherlands. He might have a considerable injury for the Yankees going into the season now with his shoulder.
Look, there are always risks associated with this event. Before we started on the 2017 planning, I had a meeting with all the owners, one per club. We went around the room and we talked about the importance of the WBC and whether the clubs could be committed to it. The support for the event was actually unanimous. And I do think we've had better support for the event from the clubs. I mean, the quality, for example, of the U.S. roster, I mean, it's really hard to argue that, I mean, you may not have one or two players that you picked out that you'd love to have.
Sure.
But it's an outstanding roster, and the teams have been really cooperative. The injury issue, I'm hopeful that the problem with Didi is not serious, but it is one of the risks associated with the event.
Did you ever have any dealings with George Steinbrenner, the big boss?
Oh, I did, yeah. As a matter of fact, about the first 5 years that I worked in baseball, I was an outside lawyer, and Mr. Steinbrenner referred to me as that young accountant. I kept trying to convince him I was a lawyer, not an accountant. But, yeah,
he kept referring to you as that?
Yeah, it was I was doing a lot of work on the economic side of the business, and he figured I was some sort of a numbers guy.
Yeah.
And,
I would think, though, that would have been a moment in your position, even though you didn't get Didi Gregorius hurt, where
Right.
you would get a phone call from GM Steinbrenner,
right? Yeah,
the third.
That is the kind of situation that causes concern among the clubs. Again, I'm not sure how serious it is. We're hopeful it's not a problem, but it is an issue that we continually deal with in trying to stage the event.
Well, I'd like to take a break, 60 seconds, and talk to you about a lot of rule changes that have been discussed by the fan base and seemingly are going to be put into effect in some way, shape, or form coming up in this season. And I want to talk to you about obviously with youth play, what you're going on with the youth leagues as well. I've got the Commissioner of Baseball, Rob Manfred, here on the Rich Eisen Show. We're back in 60 seconds. Don't go anywhere. Well, the Commissioner of Baseball, Rob Manfred, is here. We've got ourselves tonight, Team USA versus Team Japan before they take on the Puerto Rican team tomorrow night. And I want to talk to you about the bat flips that we have seen, because you mentioned how you have seen how the world looks at baseball from being around the world.
Right.
Bat flips around the world are seemingly commonplace as opposed to here in the United States. What is your stance on bat flips?
Well, I think that our unwritten rules, right, have always been the product of the players deciding what's appropriate on the field. I think what you're seeing, and you're seeing it in the WBC, is today's players are a little different than they were 25 years ago. I think that's a good thing. I think this group of players will rewrite those unwritten rules in a way that fits better for them, is probably more entertaining for our fans. And at the same time, I think those rules will continue to respect the history and traditions of our game, because our players have a great sense of history and tradition. So I'm all for that evolution. I think it's a good thing for the game.
So if more and more people start flipping bats, so be it?
If the players find that acceptable on the field, I think that's a good thing.
What if then that means more items come across your desk in your inbox of chin music and things of that?
Well, I think
respect?
I think that's a sign that the players don't find it to be acceptable, and they'll
Right.
they'll find an equilibrium there on those unwritten rules. They'll find the place where there's a little more emotion, yet nobody's annoyed enough that they're going to be throwing at someone, and that is the process of redefining those unwritten rules.
Do you think this game is more fun now?
I do think that. I think the game's great. I mean, I really do. I was sitting there last night thinking, it is so fantastic. You got a team from Puerto Rico, a team from the Netherlands. You have a crowd that is unbelievably enthusiastic. You have great athletes. We were talking about it last night. Great athletes, two of whom at least are playing out of position and showing how athletic they are. I think the game is, in fact, exciting, and I do think it will continue to evolve in a way that will grab our fans.
Let me talk to you about a few rule changes that have been out there in the ether and some that are discussed that are not put into place. I've got the Commissioner, Rob Manfred, right here. Is there truly a groundswell amongst management to put a runner on second base to start extra innings in Major League Baseball?
Well, you know, this is one of the problems when something gets out in the press before we really announce it, and that's what happened with this rule. We really weren't ready to announce it. That was intended to be a special purpose rule for the low minor leagues where, you know, often games, there's few fans there. The games are really developmental in purpose. A lot of them are played in heat, you know, very warm locations, Arizona and Florida in the summertime. And the idea with the rule is there's no developmental purpose in playing 18 innings. And so let's just have a way to bring the games to an end a little quicker. We had no intention, never suggested to the MLBPA, never suggested internally that it was going to be used at the big league level.
So that's a non-starter? That's not happening
for us, yeah.
Okay. Now, putting a runner on first base just by waving a hand, saying intentional walk is complete, just a nonverbal cue to just say put a runner on first base. What is the purpose of that in your estimation? What are you trying to achieve with that?
I think it's a small first step in dealing with what I call dead time in the game. Just points in the game where there's no real action, there's not going to be action, and I understand that, you know, in 0.001% of the time, something happens in those 4 pitches. It's really not integral to the game, and it's part of a process of taking that dead time out of the game. We saw intentional walks, 2 of them in the 11th inning. I don't think they really added anything to the action last night.
So what are the metrics you're seeing, Commissioner, on your desk about either polls that you're taking of your fan base or feedback that you're receiving from your television partners that says this game must be sped up?
I think that the one that concerns us the most is the amount of time between balls being put in play, action in the game. It's not the absolute length of the game, because length depends on what kind of game you got. Obviously, a 10-9 game is going to be longer than a 2-1 game. Our concern is the period of time between balls being put in play and producing action that keeps the fans engaged.
So you think, and there is a concern that in the day and age where we want everything on demand, we get anything we want on demand on our television sets, we're watching everything on phones, we're constantly looking at second windows, that the lyrical nature of this sport, which, by the way, I'll just let you know, I love sitting at a game, chit-chatting with a friend. Sometimes I understand that the action doesn't happen as fast, but I love that. Are you saying, are we a dying breed? Is that what you're thinking or seeing?
I don't think so, not at all. Let me say 2 things about that. First of all, I think that the in-ballpark experience, nobody quibbles with it. You don't hear people in the ballpark saying, gee, I wish a little more was going on. The in-park experience, that's why we draw 75 million people a year, because the ballpark experience is really good. I think on the action point, it is more of a broadcast issue. And there are 2 different things going on. Society's changing. You point that piece out. But the game has changed. We are at an all-time high in terms of the period of time between balls being put in play. We have record numbers of strikeouts. We have record numbers of home runs, which, again, is just a ball. It's very short, over quickly. And record numbers of relief pitchers being used. And all of those things are adding up to a changing game. I don't feel like I'm out there trying to suggest to people that we should change the game or there's something wrong with the game. What I am trying to suggest is the game is evolving naturally, and all sports manage that evolution. And I think we need to be a little more proactive about managing the change that's occurring naturally.
Commissioner Rob Manfred of baseball here in the Rich Eisen Show. And obviously, out of all the sports, I would say that baseball is the most stat-driven in many ways.
Right.
And we're talking about metrics, and we're talking about analytics, and now we're seeing half the defense on one side of the field. Are you addressing the positioning of players? Because if you're talking about action, there are more outs sometimes because there's 4 guys on the right side of the field. And there's a pull hitter, and the guy's being pitched to pull the ball, and more often than not, it's going to, I mean, are you addressing something like that?
This is something that we are having conversations about. again, it's one of those changes in the game. The number of shifts, I think it went from 3,000 2 years ago to 10,000
It's off the charts.
last year. Just crazy number of shifts. It does affect particular kinds of players. It also exacerbates what I was saying about home runs and strikeouts, right? You get a left-handed pull hitter, you shift on him, right? He's much more likely to not be able to put the ball in play. I mean, that's just the reality. So we are looking at it, but I think about the issues kind of along a continuum, right? We talked about dead time issues. An intentional walk, nothing's going to happen. Visits to the mound, 22 catcher visits in an inning. You can manage those things without affecting the competitive nature of the game. When you start to get to shifts, right, you're interfering with somebody's strategy. That's a bigger change to make than dealing with the dead time issues, in my view.
Interesting, because I'm sitting here having this conversation with you about this. It's similar to me in the same way that Commissioner Silver in the NBA has guys who don't shoot free throws very well.
Right.
And now they're being purposely fouled. And we're asking the commissioner, what do you do about that, Commissioner Silver? And his response was very similar to the one that you just gave because, hey, look, if somebody is a pull hitter and he can't go the other way, why is that your problem?
Right.
Because there's four guys on the right side of the infield.
Like I said, I really do. I think, Rich, you have to think about them along a continuum. I think we are prudent in terms of keeping our core fan base with us if we deal with the delay issues. The non-competitive, it's not changing the outcome, it's just dead time. If we deal with those first and leave the things that can change the outcome of a game to the people that manage the game, I think we are probably on more solid ground.
And then there's other issues where maybe you can institute something that might affect strategy, and that's a pitch clock. How is that being affected in the levels of baseball that you have put that into reality?
We've been very careful with the pitch clock. We deployed it in the minor leagues. We think using it, all levels of the minor leagues, using it in the minor leagues, we believe trains pitchers to move more quickly, which is a positive in and of itself. The other thing that we found is players adjust. We think this is one of those changes that players are able to adjust to. It doesn't change the game and can be used to move things along. Now, whether we get there with the MLBPA in terms of bringing it to the big league level is an open issue. There's conversations that need to be had on that topic. But I don't see that in the same category as, for example, a rule that would limit the number of relief pitchers. And if you look at major league pitchers, interestingly, not that many of them actually take more than 20 seconds to deliver the ball.
But sometimes that's, if you want to talk about dead time, the lefty-righty stuff that Tony La Russa broke ground with back in the 80s and then made vogue in the 90s, and now the copycat leagues mentality. I mean, what about the idea that there's two pitching changes in a half inning?
Look, there's no question. I mentioned it earlier when I talked about the changes in the game. The number of pitchers we use in a season has increased dramatically, and it's all these matchup pitchers. They come up and down from the minor leagues. They're used for a while. They are used more frequently, and then maybe demoted. That is a phenomenon that is more difficult to manage because it does affect the competition on the field. Having said that, it's one that we are thinking a lot about because it is a major change.
By the way, just so you know, I do this with my boss, with Commissioner Goodell, about the rule book and rule changes.
Right.
Because I'm a rule book wonk, if you will, in a way, and it's also a way to affect the popularity of a sport that I love in baseball, and so that's sort of the thing. I have a couple of ideas, if you don't mind, if we throw it out there.
I'm happy to do that.
And I'm sure that there's one that you've already come up with, something from the world of football, that you put a mic on your umps and they announce to the crowd what they're reviewing, and then after review, instead of just coming out and just going safe or out, and we're wondering, what are we talking about? He's safe because why? He's out because why? Not to turn your umps into Ed Hockley, where it comes out in full poetic verse, but what about that idea?
Yeah, we have talked about this idea. I think that we may try to do something on the scoreboards first in terms of an explanation with the definitive replay available to the fans. We have had a lot of suggestions about that. You know, it's interesting. I think the broader point is this, Rich. All sports, the NBA has, the NFL has, use rule changes to adjust the game, to react to things that are happening on the field, to make the entertainment product better. I think if you look back, the sport that's been slowest to do it is us, right? The last major rule change that affected play on the field was the DH, and we only did it for one of the two leagues, right?
Right.
So I do think that your suggestion about looking at other sports and what's is a good thing in terms of giving our fans comfort that this is the appropriate way to manage a sport.
And then in terms of what the NBA is dealing with right now is players resting,
Right.
where people come and they expecting to see the stars, they don't see them.
Right.
I mean, sometimes a day after night game, your stars are not on the field in certain places. Do you
Right.
talk to your teams about that at
You know,
all?
we don't have as many issues with players being rested. It's more a natural part of the fabric of our game because it's an everyday game. You know, 100. You think about it, Rich, right? I think I worked pretty hard 162 times in 183 days, with most of those off days consumed by travel. That's a pretty rough schedule, and I think our fans understand that periodically our players are going to be down, and the effect of a single player being out in baseball is not as great as in some other sports.
Couple more minutes with Commissioner Rob Manfred here before we send you off to a youth play function that I want to talk to you about. What about some of these stars? I mean, if for instance, Josh Donaldson, I'm just throwing him out there. He's
Right.
one of our favorite guests. I love that guy.
Yeah,
He's
great
got
player.
a great way about him. He's got a great attitude. What about getting these stars out there in front of a camera, in front of a microphone? That's the way to connect with your stars of the game today. What is the plan that you guys have and with the club level, et cetera, to get these guys on shows like this or all over the place?
Absolutely no question that we need to work with our players to build their individual brands. And, you know, as you point out, we have great raw material right now.
No
We got
question.
a great generation of young players. I mean, some of them on display last night
Right.
that you can really work with, appealing to fans. And I think that it has to be multi-platform exposure for our players. We're trying to work with the Players Association right now to make a little bigger deal about player likenesses, player promotional activities to get our players out there more. We need cooperation from the MLBPA on that front. And we need to be smart about the way we do it. Our schedule presents challenges. There's no question that other sports don't face. You know, if you play, I'm not suggesting it's easy to be an NFL player, but if you play once a week, it's a lot easier to find time to come and sit with Rich Eisen than when you're playing 162 times in 183 days.
And then my 6-year-old, I've got an 8-year-old, 6-year-old. My 6-year-old just started playing his season out there, short center field out there with the kids. You know, not hitting off a tee, but
Right.
getting pitched at. What is and your concept about getting this game in front of these kids? You talk about slow pace.
Right.
Sometimes when they're not hitting the ball, it's something that they find difficult to focus on. I've seen it personally. What you're going to this youth event that's coming up right now. What is your plan on that front?
Well, let me talk about three things.
Sure.
Number one, it is really important to make age-appropriate modifications to the game to keep kids interested when they're young. All the sports that are growing, we've done a real study on who's growing, who's not. All of the sports that are growing make age-appropriate modifications, and we're trying to work with some of our great partners in the youth space to make sure that we have coherence and consistency in the way those modifications to the rules are made to keep kids interested. Number two is pure opportunity. We're working very hard to provide playing opportunities in underserved areas. We have a great partner in the Boys and Girls Club. They run our Reviving Baseball in the Inner Cities program. But that's just the beginning of the funnel for us. We have 6 urban youth academies that have been built by major league clubs where elite players can gather and play in order to keep kids interested in playing the game. We're running development invitationals, one in Arizona on pitching, one more general in Florida during the summer, to take kids from underserved areas and give them a chance to play elite baseball. We've had great returns on this so far. We have about 8% of our major league players are African American right now. The past 5 drafts, 20% of the first round has been African American. So we're really seeing some great changes there. And then the last piece is the broadest possible program, which is the Play Ball Initiative. These are fun events. They don't necessarily involve 18 kids in uniforms and an umpire, but they expose people to the game to plant the hook of being interested in what we regard to be the greatest sport in the world.
Well, this show's on Angels Radio, and I know you've got an event with the Angels to get to. I don't want them looking around and saying it was our show that delayed Commissioner Rob Manfred. So thanks for coming in here.
Rich, always great to spend time with you. I really enjoyed it.
I appreciate it. How was the pace of this interview?
Very good.
Okay.
Your pace I don't have to worry about.
Excellent. Terrific.
The Rich Eisen Show, weekdays at noon Eastern on Audience.